Hi, I'm Johnston. I dye fabric and make quilts. It seems that as fiber artists, we frequently need fabric that has colors blending into each other. In this series of short videos, I'd like to show you some techniques that will be options for you to dye any color blend you want. In the first video, I demonstrated pouring thin dye on wrinkled fabrics for a very textural blend. In this video, part 2, I'll demonstrate pouring thin dyes onto flat fabric for soft color edges and smooth value blends. I will also review the last step of the dye process, washing out the excess. You will find quick reference lists below the video for the single chemical dye colors I used in this video and links to free downloadable handouts of all the recipes you will need. You may want to look at my books and online videos about how to dye fabric for even more details. First, I start with powdered dyes and make liquid concentrates of each color. After I stir them into a solution of urea water, they dissolve and I can take off my dust mask. I made a list of these color mixes in the references. The two greens look different because I used two different yellows. These simple two-color blends are still wet on the table. However, I often like to mix more than two colors on one piece of fabric. I often place the colors I plan to use at the top. I start by pouring one color on this piece of fabric. It's slightly damp, has soda ash on it already, and I work pretty quickly because I want to have soft edges to the colors and rub them together. I don't really work this fast, but I speeded up the video so you could get the idea of the color going on this cotton fabric. I work at pushing away the bubbles and I stretch the fabric out flat. As it wrinkles, I spread the dye and overlap the colors as best I can. At the end, I get it ready to cover. I want to have it flat with no wrinkles so I can make a smooth blend. I know the colors will continue to run after I put plastic over them. So I'm pushing out the last of the big bubbles. This is what it looked like washed and dry. You can see that the colors did continue to flow. I like to have a piece of fabric where it's dark on one side, and as I cut across it or sew across it, the value gets lighter and lighter and lighter. So this is a blend of blue and red that I'm spreading on the pretty wet cotton sateen. I add the blue in the corner, and then I put urea water in the mix to make it lighter. And as I go across the fabric, I keep adding urea water, diluting the color and spreading it. I have to work quickly, try to minimize the marks that the edges of the dye and my fingers make and the bubbles. At the end, I notice that I don't have that much contrast between the dark corner and the light corner, so I'm adding blue directly from the dye concentrate bottle and spreading it quickly. Trying to make it even. smooth. This is it washed and dried, and you can see where the color I started with had some red in it, but the blue concentrate was straight blue. Now this is a damp piece of cotton. It's really wrinkled though. I start in the middle and I'm going to work outwards to push out the wrinkles and the bubbles. I have enough colors mixed so I don't have to mix them while I'm working. Also, I don't have to mix a lot of colors because I know I'll be mixing them as they overlap each other. A larger piece is a bit of a challenge because it's hard to get to all the edges and rub them out and make them smooth. You can see I'm pushing the dye with my gloves and also pushing out some of the air bubbles that are between the fabric and the table. You can see that some of the colors are spreading out. They are a mix and they flow at different rates. I really like the blue on the edge of this black, so I decided that I would let it flow some more and not put the dye right up next to it. This is the piece after it's washed and dried. Still pretty bright colors, but you can see there were places that I blended the edges and really well, like in this corner, and other places where the dye that hit the fabric first really makes the biggest impact. I also like to do this on silk scarves. I've just dipped these into the soda solution. I spin them out in my washing machine so that I can get most of the excess, and I cover these with plastic to keep in the moisture, and some of them I hang on the line so they'll dry and I can work later on them dry. The silk is very thin and it flows quickly. I use my gloves to push it around and make sure that the hem of the scarf gets enough dye on it. I have the colors mixed already so I can pick them up and use them without having to stop because it's easier to get a softer edge if you keep on working on the wet side of it. Then I can go back and add another color over the top wherever I think it would look good. And I'd have to spread it pretty quickly. It works a little differently because the silk is already wet. Once the dye is on there, though, you can move it around a little bit. You can't really take it away. Here it is after it's cured and washed. As you can see, you have to get used to the idea that when it's dry, it's lighter. Something we have to learn as we practice fabric dyeing. This is one of the dry scarves. I put on lines and dots with thickened dye. And I've taped it down to a piece of plastic so that later I can pick it up and use that part of my table. I like it to sit in the place where the dye is, where I put the dye on it, until it's cured. Right now I'm mixing different values of the same color of green, dark forest green. That one has 1 tablespoon of dye and 1 tablespoon of urea water. And this one will have 1 tablespoon of dye and 2 tablespoons of urea water. So I literally have 3 values of the same color of green. And I always put them in the order of their value because you can't tell by looking at the cups. This is the darkest value going on the end. And since the fabric is dry, it doesn't spread as quickly as the wet fabric, the wet silk. My idea was to have one end of the scarf really dark and have lighter values as it gets down to the other end. As you wet fabric, whether it's with thin dye or thick dye, it stretches. And so this process is one of pushing and pulling and stretching the fabric so it won't have wrinkles where you don't want them. So I just progress along the length of the scarf, hoping I won't run out of my color. Here I've finished pouring the dye on and I'm kind of creating my own wrinkles. Now you see it washed and the thickened dye pops right out. And speaking of washing, I want you to know all the fabrics in this demonstration. I washed them all together in the same sink. Put them in the hot water at the end, and then I might even put them in the washing machine. 140 degrees water. If you want to work large, you can. It just takes a little more preparation. For this long piece of fabric, I had the dye already mixed and laid out along the table so I could grab it and pour and keep working, spreading it. To keep it smooth and brushing out the bubbles. And here's one of my quilts in the contact series, where I've got a lot of sky in this skyline quilt, and my grandson is looking at it. Blending colors and values has unlimited possibilities. Be ready to get different results each time. Next, in part 3, I will show some techniques to create color blends on cloth with thickened dyes instead of thin. It works a lot differently, and there are many options. Don't forget to check the links below for more resources and information. Thank you.